Good afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started for our afternoon session. Let me do a preview of the afternoon for you, because we won't all be collected together again after this session. First and most important, you will have 2 more opportunities to eat. All right. So first, we realized there was some concerns about the lack of dessert at lunch. But you will get some sweets after the lecture. You have to earn it. So pay attention, and at our break there will be coffee and some sweets for you. Then again, at the end of the day at 4 o'clock, to send you on your way and to offer one more chance to network, in the room right next door over here called the stage door, we'll have water and soda and snacks for you. So you can grab something and hit the road, or you can hang around here for a while, which we invite you to do. So we're trying to take good care of you. Second, you can help us out by being sure you fill out an evaluation form before you're on your way. There is one in your packet. There are also some up front at the registration desk, and they will be in the afternoon session room. So please let us know your opinion of the events that you were able to attend. Third, you have the opportunity to purchase some very interesting books. First, books written by our speaker, whom I will introduce to you in a moment, Dr. Barnett, and she is willing to autograph a book for you if you purchase one, so I encourage you to do that, and that, again, will be out here in the atrium. We also have some books from the visit last evening of Madeline Kunin, and apparently a few of them are already autographed, so if you get in line quickly, you may be able to purchase one of those. And fourth, before I get to my formal introduction, we're very pleased that we have a cohort of students who have gathered with us for the speech, and we welcome you here this afternoon. You can also have a cookie when you leave. Okay. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Rosalind Chait Barnett. She's currently the director of the Community, Families, and Work Program and a senior scientist with the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis University. She has a distinguished career as a scholar and a consultant in the area of gender and the workplace, and several other areas too, but I'm going to focus mostly on that one in this introduction. She is the co-author and author of several books, and I'll just list 3 of them that had titles that I found particularly compelling. The first one, The Competent Woman, Perspectives on Socialization. A second title, Gender and Stress. And a third, Same Difference, How Gender Myths Are Hurting Our Relationships, Our Children, and Our Jobs. She also has a long list of book chapters and journal articles, in addition to many other publications, including in newspapers and magazines. She has served on the editorial board of many of the most prominent journals in her field and has received major grants from many funding organizations, including the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the National Institute of Mental Health, Radcliffe College, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. She has a BA in psychology from Queens College in New York and an MA and PhD from Harvard University, those in clinical psychology. Her comments today are entitled Gender, Leadership, and the Natural Order. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barnett.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I look forward to the question and answer period when we're through. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the natural order of things. This is a driver for a lot of beliefs we have about gender and leadership. So what does that mean, actually? What does that mean? In the natural order, it's assumed that women are uniquely endowed for domesticity and nurture, while men are presumed to be uniquely endowed for leadership, but while women are not. So, put simply, by nature, men take charge and women take care. If this thinking is correct, then powerful women in leadership positions are anomalies. They go against the natural order. Like other beliefs, this belief shapes our perceptions, our expectations, our behaviors, and importantly, what the next generation learns about women in leadership. The belief in gender differences in leadership is reinforced endlessly. One particularly insidious and well-documented way is through a process social psychologists call stereotype confirmation. So once we have a stereotype in our heads, like women can't lead, we have a tendency to see every instance that confirms our stereotype, and we filter out all the counter examples. Because these beliefs are so powerful, we need to understand them better and explain how they propagate. These beliefs even color the interpretation scientists make of their own data. So we all think of a scientist as very objective, but you'll see in a minute that that's not always the case. If scientists, maybe especially male scientists, although probably not only male scientists, share the bias that males are uniquely suited for leadership, then their interpretations of their data may well reflect that bias. So before we turn to the impact of these beliefs on women in politics and business, which I'm going to focus on today, well, let's take a look at a few examples of this kind of bias in studies of our non-human primate ancestors, especially chimpanzees and bonobos. Well, for those of you who haven't seen chimpanzees, here are a couple. They've been studied very intensively for over 40 years in the wild. We know a lot about them and how they are organized socially. They are organized patriarchally, and we know a lot about their patterns of warfare. So in order to enter the adult male dominance hierarchy, male chimpanzees first have to dominate all females in their group. Among chimps, infanticide occurs, only males hunt and eat meat, males resort to dominance displays and aggression to resolve conflict, and in many ways our male stereotype reflects the dominant features of male chimp behavior. I think you'll see the connection. Now, let's take a look at bonobos. They look sort of similar, and in fact they are sort of similar, but they're relatively less well studied. They were only discovered not that many years ago, and they live on only a very restricted geographical area. But they are genetically as similar to human beings as are the chimpanzees. So these are our next cousins. One big difference between these two non-human primate species is that bonobos live in matriarchal societies, very different, whereas chimps live, as I mentioned, in patriarchal societies. In bonobos, males maintain their relationships with their mothers throughout their lives. In fact, they never assert dominance over the females. And the way you know a male's rank in the bonobo culture is through its mother's rank, and not the other way around. In addition, bonobos are much more peaceful, social, and sexual than are chimps. In contrast to chimps, among bonobos there's female dominance, infanticide does not occur, males and females hunt and eat meat, and sex is used to resolve conflict. They're very sexual. These relatively new revelations about bonobo behavior have not been readily accepted by many primatologists. Now, primatologists have been studying chimp behavior, and this is how it's supposed to be. Male organized, male dominant, and so forth. And all of a sudden, there is a discovery about bonobos and their behavior. Well, you know, the primatologists don't like change. We talked about that this morning, and they had a way to try and figure this out to maintain their beliefs. So I'll show you this woman, Amy Parrish. She's a primatologist, and her quote is, "Not everybody's comfortable with the idea that arguably our last common ancestor might have been matriarchal, maybe sort of aggressive toward males even. So unnatural is male deferent behavior that bonobo males have been called henpecked and mama's boys." This is coming from scientists. Clearly, in our culture, anything but male dominance tends to be treated as evidence of some kind of dysfunction. And there are many examples of the ways researchers have spun the story of bonobo male deference to females. Some of Amy Parrish's colleagues refuse to accept the pattern of female dominance, period. They call it strategic male deference, meaning that, of course, males could be in charge if they wanted to be in charge, but for strategic reasons like having more sex, they're stepping back and letting females have the upper hand. Interestingly, when they see instances of male dominance, they never say, obviously the females could be dominant if they wanted to, but for strategic reasons they're stepping back. That's something that's never said. And in one scientific publication, the male deferent behavior was described as male chivalry, not an empirical term for a scientific paper. I think we can all agree about that. And of course, Amy says it's not chivalry. It's just that females have the upper hand. Let's call it what it is. So here's a clear example in which male aggression toward females is considered natural, whereas female aggression towards males is not, quite clearly not considered natural. When males attack females, as in the case with the chimps, nothing seems out of the ordinary. However, when females attack males, zookeepers and others feel strongly that something must be done. So in one anecdote that Amy Parrish shares, a zookeeper decided to give a timeout to a particular female bonobo who was frequently prone to attacking males. The idea was to teach her not to engage in such unnatural behavior. No such behavior modification was ever contemplated when male chimpanzees attack females. So, if we ignore these lessons learned from our primate ancestors, we are all often conflating gender and power, and we ignore the role of situation in shaping male and female leadership behavior. Because men tend to hold most positions of power in our society, it's easy to conclude that there must be something about being male, whether it's the genes, brain structures, or hormones, that's the key to leadership. In the face of such seemingly compelling evidence, it's hard to appreciate the role of the situation in shaping leadership behavior. Yet there's compelling evidence that the situation, not gender, is a determining factor. I hope to make my case this afternoon. I'm going to talk today about two domains of leadership, in politics and business. Let's first talk about women in politics. It's very timely right now, of course. Women audacious enough to seek political power are routinely dogged by gender-specific coverage that focuses on their looks, fashion sense, familial relationships, and other feminizing details that have nothing to do with their expertise. I'm going to give you a few examples. Maybe you'll recognize others. We can talk about them later if you like. This is how the Associated Press, in a lengthy profile, informed readers about Harriet Miers. Remember Harriet Miers? She was George Bush's first nominee to the Phil Sandra Day O'Connor Supreme Court seat. Often via quotes from relatives and colleagues, the article gives us such important information as, she likes to play tennis, run and take in a movie. She's not somebody who's a gossip. She always remembers everybody's birthday. And her royal blue suit shined with a brooch her mother gave her. And she was a workaholic. It's noteworthy that such information was not shared about Sam Alito, Bush's second nominee to the same Supreme Court seat. Well, importantly, if the media doesn't focus on candidates' positions and on the issues, but only on their looks, it's easy to dismiss them as credible leaders. I think we'll all agree about that. But I'll give you some more examples. Condoleezza Rice. On the day she became America's first African-American female national security advisor, a long front-page New York Times story reported that her dress size is between a 6 and an 8. She gushes Southern charm. She's captivating without ever appearing confessional or vulnerable, and she has a girlish laugh. In the same profile, we learn that she's always impeccably dressed, usually in a classic suit with modest hemline, and prefers comfortable pumps and conservative jewelry. Only near the end of this long article do we learn anything about her experiences and positions on national security. This was a quote about a story when Condoleezza Rice was photographed wearing high boots. The mind searches for ways to put it all into context. It turns to fiction, to caricature, to shadowy daydreams. Dominatrix. It's as though sex and power can only coexist in the fantasy. When a woman combines them in the real world, stubborn stereotypes have her power devolving into a form that is purely sexual. The issue is not that these are the only details the media shares with us about these powerful women. It is that such details are only discussed with reference to such women. We never hear anything about men's shoe sizes or what the colors of their suits are, or we never told about the sentimental value of their cufflinks or their wristwatch. These tidbits are saved for females and reflect a highly gendered media treatment of women in leadership positions. It's constructive here to recall the candidacy of Elizabeth Dole, arguably one of the most qualified candidates for president. The media treated her as a lightweight. Her treatment by the press is remarkably similar to the treatment of women candidates who followed her. Despite her enviable credentials, Phi Beta Kappa, graduate from Duke University, graduate of the Harvard Law School, former labor secretary in the Reagan cabinet, former secretary of transportation in the first Bush White House cabinet, head of the Red Cross, high name recognition, she was portrayed as overambitious, tailoring her ideology to the need to advance her career, chilly, nasty, syrupy, Southern accent, pearl chokers and color-coordinate outfit. Too feminine. Rehearsed, scripted, robotic, controlled, frozen, a Stepford wife. Speaking style was dubbed Tammy Faye Baker meets the Home Shopping Network. There was a lot of speculation about her sex life and her hairdo. It was a lot of hairdo stuff. The media focus was on her first woman status, not on the seasoned political operative that she was. In the pre-primary days of 1999, going back, John McCain was presented as a presidential hopeful, while Liddy Dole was mentioned in terms of her presumed inability to raise money. Of course, this became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more the press says you can't raise money, the more you can't raise money. As was true of other powerful women in politics, the media focused on her personality. This sort of media marginalization reinforces the regressive notion that women are more emotional, less knowledgeable, less qualified to lead. These are some of the things that came out in our workshop this morning. And by proxy, less electable than their male counterparts. Despite this kind of treatment by the media, 2 recent polls show overwhelming support for female politicians among the general public. Between 79 and 81% of Americans say they would feel comfortable with a woman president. And similar numbers believe a woman would handle homeland security and foreign policy issues as well as or better than a male president. And this is a graph showing if your party nominated a woman for president, would you vote for her if she were qualified for the job? And you can see an increasing number of percent that would endorse a female for president over to 205. And so it's come a long way since 1937. It's even come a long way since 1971. So the public is ready for a woman president, but the media seems quite as a way to go. That brings us to today. So let's see what the press has done for Hillary Clinton. She's certainly one of the ablest candidates, male or female, that's entered the presidential race. But this is what we hear. Trumping the witch factor, that Clinton cackle. Slippery Hillary loses her aura of inevitability. We're all so terrified of intellectual women. Humanizing Hillary. These are from a variety of papers, including some in Europe. There's a lot of European press around her, too. Here's more. We hear about the hard edge, the witch, the shrill, the cackle, loud, inappropriate, and mirthless, queen of mean, slippery Hillary, calculating. A scary sound that was somewhere between a cackle and a screech. And here was a picture of her in a witch outfit that was on the Drudge Report. And then the other theme was that she's an old hag. Aging Hillary, a voter turnoff. And aging Hillary fights to be taken beyond face value. Forget that John McCain is many years her senior, that she has been tagged with this one. Why are we counting Hillary's wrinkles? Why indeed? In fact, a lot of the stories criticize this kind of media coverage, yet the headlines persist. And then we had the other story about Hillary. Hillary plans Carolina crying jag. Can Hillary cry her way back to the White House? Cry, Clinton, cry. You call that crying, Mrs. Clinton? I'll give you something to cry about. And now, maybe this is quite amazing. For those of you who haven't noticed, there's a teeny bit of cleavage. Get that, because, let me tell you, I wanted to check this out because I heard there was a lot of coverage of the cleavage issue. I did a LexisNexis search for the last 12 months, and I had my 2 keywords were Hillary Clinton and cleavage, and I had 3,000 hits. So, here are some of the headlines. The cleavage conundrum, cleavage and the Clinton, abreast of aging. No booby prizes in this campaign. Now wait just a minute. An outfit that show only your weaknesses. By the way, if you notice now, and I've been noticing, when you see a picture of Hillary Clinton wearing a V, she always has something underneath. She doesn't try, to run this gauntlet again. While the press has certainly covered Hillary's positions on important policy issues, she's been subjected to the kind of personal scrutiny that male candidates just don't get. There was no media feeding frenzy over Fred Thompson's wrinkles or John McCain's age. Of course, there was some issue about his age, but nothing like what happened with Hillary Clinton. There was no flap over McCain's incessant use of the phrase, my friends. He must say that 3 times in every sentence. And yet, we don't hear the media making a big do out of that. But Hillary's every sound and feature is fair game for the press. This bias about women's inability to lead is reflected in an obsession over their personal failures. And I'm going to show you just briefly. This is a New York Times piece, They Conquered Their Left, which is a main theme about women who make headway in the way of the world. I'm not going to focus on all these. I am going to focus on Governor Jane Swift. You might not know who she was. She was elected as Lieutenant Governor in Massachusetts, first woman to be elected to that position. And then when Governor Wells stepped down, she became, Governor Paul Cellucci moved to Canada. She became governor of Massachusetts for a short period of time. And then she was going to run for governor, but the Republican National Committee decided that Mitt Romney would be more electable, so she had to bow out. But this is how the New York Times reported the story of these three women. I just mentioned who Jane Swift was, and there's also Carol Wallace, former editor of People magazine, and Rosie O'Donnell. This is taping her last talk show in May 2002. Forget the fact she's back in the world again. They had written her off. Notice the bolded tagline down here. Some say women have less psychic investment in careers. That is a huge tagline. It comes up all the time. Let's focus now on Jane Swift. I mentioned before that I was going to do that. Research shows there's far more media attention to the personal situation of women in public life than there is of men. Arguably, Jane Swift wins the prize for having endured the most relentless scrutiny of her family life. Why? How many of you know about Jane Swift? Okay, well, then a lot of you don't, so you'll be really fascinated, I think, to hear this story. It's quite a story. She was the first person, as I mentioned, to run for statewide election while pregnant. I didn't mention that. And the first elected lieutenant governor to give birth, she had twin daughters while she was in office. Journalists and other media types had a field day, hashing and rehashing the pros and cons of women's continuing to combine work and family life. You can just imagine. Here are some of the headlines. Campaigning for office on the mommy track. The year of the stork. An announcement. Candidate has baby. Massachusetts delivers. A mommy track derails. Mama's delicate condition. Jane Swift, motherhood in the Massachusetts governor's office. Almost without exception, every reference to her in the media began with the fact that she was, quote, the first governor to give birth while in office, or that she, quote, recently gave birth to twins. No matter how irrelevant this was, that was how she was described. For example, an article recounting her record in office and announcing her decision to run for governor began with the following sentence. It began with the sentence. Here's a woman running for governor of Massachusetts, the first woman. Starts with the sentence. Acting Governor Jane M. Swift, who made history as the first governor to give birth while in office, said today that she would run for governor of Massachusetts in 2002. Now, how many male candidates do we have as a prelude to their announcement the fact that they have children at all? Or how many? Or who takes care of them? Or anything? Nothing. One would think that no previous governor had ever taken away any time from work for health or any other reason. In fact, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary, when she wanted to take some time when she had the twins. In 2001, the governor of Rhode Island was laid up at home for more than a month, recovering from surgery for prostate cancer. No one demanded he surrender his powers. Ronald Reagan recuperated from a gunshot wound while president. Dwight Eisenhower suffered a heart attack, a bout with ileitis, and a minor stroke. Moreover, these two men with their fingers were men who had their finger on the hot button. Swift's predecessor, Governor Paul Cellucci, underwent heart surgery while in office. Cellucci's predecessor, Bill Weld, was often criticized for spending lots of time away from work. In his words, Weld's work, quote, getting to be governor is the hardest part. I used to go on vacation for a week at a time, and I wouldn't even call in. As one journalist asked, who knows how many male governors have children or who takes care of them? But for her, when she had the twins, there was just a nonstop media coverage. On the surface, the clamor was about whether she could perform her official duties while also taking some time for pregnancy-related medical issues. But what was the real deal? Well, the real deal was that she was really rejecting her family to selfishly pursue her career. That was the main kind of, understory. But it wasn't true. Her husband had long before decided to support her political ambitions by quitting his job and caring for their children. As she put it, when she decided to run for governor in 2002, quote, when you decide to have children, adults then arrange their lives around them, and that's what we've done, she and her husband. Only those of you who have never read a single article indicating that men can be as nurturing to children as women could honestly claim that the couple's young children were at risk, but that was what was happening. Her wishes and ambitions notwithstanding, she decided not to run in 2002, as I mentioned, because she bowed to Republican pressure to make way for Mitt Romney's candidacy. Unfortunately, her personal life created such a stir that her many political challenges, successes, and failures were completely overshadowed. No one remembers anything that Jane Swift did in office. She was well aware of her situation. As lieutenant governor, she was asked to talk to an audience of elementary school students about her career in politics. After a few minutes, she pointed to the army of journalists, reporters, and TV cameramen surrounding the auditorium and asked the 4th and 5th graders, "Does anybody know why they're following me?" And one boy said, "Because they want to know what you stand for." And amused Swift responded, "I only wish that were true. It's because I'm pregnant and all these guys think that that's a great big deal." So, what were the lessons learned? She could not successfully juggle the increasing and often competing duties of a gubernatorial candidate, chief executive, and mother. That was a takeaway story. But she was actually very well qualified for a high-level leadership role in politics. She had served as a state senator, an executive with the Mass Port Authority, and as the Commonwealth's Consumer Affairs Secretary before being elected lieutenant governor in 1998. At 38, she was the youngest governor in the nation's history. Her qualifications were never as publicized as her personal life. In fact, whatever her failings, she will be remembered most for the disastrous results of her daring violation of deeply held views about the proper role of women. In her emotional address announcing her decision to drop out of the governor's race, she did what was expected, saying that she could, quote, not successfully juggle the increasing and often competing duties of gubernatorial candidate. But no one will ever know whether she could have successfully juggled the roles of wife, mother, and governor, because the stranglehold of the natural order that women care and they don't take charge was just too tight. With all the talk about whether women can be commander-in-chief and can be the head of state, you never would know that many women are now and have in recent past been leaders of many countries. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I think you'll be impressed with a number of women who most of us have no clue have been leaders of their countries. So starting back in the 70s, we have the Prime Minister of Ceylon, Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel. First woman head of state in the Americas was Juan Perón's widow, Isabella, President of Argentina. The Premier of the Central African Republic, Margaret Thatcher, who became the first female Prime Minister of Great Britain, and the only person in the 20th century to be re-elected to that office for a third consecutive term. Also in Europe, Simone Weil of France became the first president of the European Parliament. In the 1980s, we have the President of Ireland, a woman, Prime Minister of Norway, Premier of Yugoslavia, President of the Philippines, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, who we all know. She was first woman head of a Muslim state and was assassinated recently. In the 1990s, we have the President of Ireland, President of Nicaragua, Australia's first female Premier, the Premier of British Columbia, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and the first woman named French socialist Edith Cresson was France's first female Premier, and Poland's first female Prime Minister in 1992. And in the 2000s, not that long ago, Elizabeth Johnson Sirleaf was the first elected female president of Liberia and the first woman to be elected head of state of any African country. Angela Merkel was the first woman elected as Chancellor of Germany, and Michelle Bachelet was elected president of Chile and the first woman to be elected head of state of any South American country. So with all this, and we still here are hand-wringing over, can women do this? So just to give you a mosaic of all of these people, there have been many, many, many women who've held major positions of power that most American women don't have any clue about, and maybe most American men as well. Very little media coverage of these women. So I'm going to move on to business, and you'll hear some overlap, but some differences as well. We all know that there are growing numbers of women in management, but we also know that they're not at the highest levels. We see a similar media treatment of women's ability to lead in business, and here in the business world, the two themes are omnipresent. Women don't want powerful careers, and women who have powerful careers drop out. So we saw a little bit of that with Jane Swift's story, but here you'll see it in sharper relief. Perhaps the best-known story about women not wanting power, supposedly not wanting power, is the Brenda Barnes story. Anyone know the name's Brenda Barnes? Is she familiar? Okay, well, you'll hear a very fascinating story. She spent 22 years at PepsiCo before being named president and CEO at PepsiCo North America in 1996. She quit in 1998 to be with her family. When she quit, the business world went crazy. One of corporate America's highest-ranking women said she was quitting because she couldn't do her job and raise her children. That was the take the media had. Her resignation renewed the debate over work and family conflict. Some women feared Ms. Barnes' quitting confirmed damaging stereotypes that women couldn't be good executives and good parents. Here was some of the kinds of ways the media picked this up. That she made the choice of a new generation, personal interests over professional ones. The news sent shockwaves through company boardrooms. Companies may be forced to change their corporate cultures. This may be the tip of the iceberg, said a major family expert, Brad Schrader, actually from Iowa State University. The story that Barnes couldn't handle a working family was undermined by the facts. After leaving Pepsi, Barnes kept in touch with the corporate world. She remained on the boards of several major corporations, and in 2005, she became Chief Executive Officer of Sara Lee. Now, in case you don't know, Sara Lee is a huge Fortune 500 company with operations in 58 countries. It markets products in nearly 200 nations. The company employs approximately 137,000 employees worldwide. Its products and services include fresh and frozen baked goods, which we all know, processed meats, coffee, intimate apparel, legwear, and so forth. In 2007, its revenue was $12.3 billion. So in sharp contrast to Barnes, who was written off because she took off some time to pay more attention to her children, her husband, who was also an employee at PepsiCo, he was the treasurer there. He was also on a fast track. Well, he quit. And what was his reason? To spend the summer with his kids. Not surprising, his resignation was barely noticed by the media. There was no firestorm of reaction about men's inability to combine a high-powered career with family life. Not a peep about that. Men who leave office are never seen as trendsetters. And here are some men, I'm sure you can all name others, but this is the few I mentioned, who quit their job. Secretary of State Robert Reich, who now teaches at Brandeis, now in California, he moved out there. Phil Donahue, Paul Cellucci was governor of Massachusetts, Newt Gingrich, Fred Thompson, Phil Graham, and Joe Scarborough. Men who leave never spark a national discussion about work-family conflict. Men's commitment to work is never called into question. That's just say for women. When they quit, we get nonstop. Now, this is a really interesting story. This is Patricia Russo. Very important case in point. She was rated by Fortune magazine in 2002 as the 13th most powerful woman in the world. In 2005, she was named the most powerful woman in the world. She was the chairman and chief executive of Lucent Technologies in 2005. She now heads a new telecommunications giant formed by the merger of Lucent and Alcatel. The company will be one of the largest of the world and the largest in the world in terms of revenues, over $25 billion in revenues, and the largest company run by a woman. In 2006, she was rated, here it is, the most powerful woman in the world. The day the merger was announced, numerous stories describe Russo's stellar accomplishments during her 20-year career at Lucent. But no mention was made of the obvious, that women can clearly lead successfully in highly competitive business environments. Now, unlike the response that would have occurred if she had failed, no gender generalizations were made. If she failed, then women can't do it. If a woman succeeds, the obverse is never made a major point. We can only hope that the next time a prominent businesswoman fails, the media will resist the temptation to ascribe her failure to her gender. This is quite amazing. It was amazing to me. This is a cover story for a 2003 Fortune magazine article celebrating the 50 most powerful women in America. The title, Power. The subtitle, Do Women Really Want It? Now, I ask you, can you possibly imagine a Fortune magazine cover on the 50 most powerful men in America with the same subtitle? Can't imagine. Do men really want power? No one would even dream of asking that question. Okay, so that's how the media is dealing with women in leadership in business and politics. Now let's take a little look at the research data on women in leadership. Now, this is not meant to be exhaustive, obviously, because there's a huge literature, but I'm going to give you some of the flavor of it. According to a 2003 study by Catalyst, which is an organization that promotes women in business, women today cite the same barriers to senior leadership levels as women did way back in 1966. What are those? Lack of managerial experience, exclusion from informal networks, stereotyping, preconceptions of women's roles and abilities. Now, why are women making such slow progress up the corporate ladder? Well, if those are some of the issues, and they're still around all those years later, that's one of the reasons. There are also additional theories. that women are channeled into HR positions and other positions earlier on, so they don't get the managerial experience that it's crucial for them to move up the corporate ladder. And they don't often have profit and loss responsibilities because of where they're usually put into staff positions, not line positions. And there's persistent discrimination, which is very hard to quantify, although I'm going to give you a little flavor later of how some people have done that. There's another whole group of people who have other theories that maybe women don't have what it takes for leadership. They don't have the right hormones, their brains don't have the right configurations, and they're not adequately motivated. I showed you the tagline before, women aren't as invested in their careers. And of course, these common to all these theories is something about the women themselves, something inherently lacking in women. You can point to the brain or hormones, whatever you want. It's not ever about discrimination or systemic bias or anything out there. Most of these stories have to do with some defect in women. And after this, I hope you be alert to the media coverage of all this because it's pretty consistent. Now, how do you deal with the paradox that there are women who are successful and yet they're women? So one way to say, well, these women are really not really women, they're sort of unfeminine. They're kind of not likable, they're aggressive, they're intimidating, so that they don't really kind of count. And research studies show that very different results. If you take, do a study with college students, say, who haven't had any work experience, and you try to elicit some ideas of theirs about women in management, you get very stereotyped responses. And they rate men much higher in leadership abilities than women. But if you think about it for a minute, these young people have had no workplace experience, for the most part, so they're reacting to stereotypes. What else can they be reacting to? And that's what you get. And then you have a report about study shows that. If you see that, look at who the study was conducted on. If they're people who have had no experience, they just forget about it because you're just getting a rehash of the stereotypes. What you want are studies, and there are a lot of them, of people who have actually worked for women and men in the real world. When the study participants are employees who have had actual experience, then the findings are very different. In comparisons of men and women leaders in organizational settings, few gender differences in leadership abilities or style emerge. Very, very different results. Not surprising when you think about how the studies are done, but the headlines can be very misleading. So one of my goals is to make you better consumers of media stuff, and that's one of the ways. Now here's an article. It was in Business Week, 2000, As Leaders, Women Rule. This is an article that reported numerous studies that show that female managers outshine their male counterparts in almost every measure. This is done by studies of employees. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but by and large, not only in this article, she reviews several studies that show that women executives, when rated by peers, subordinates, and bosses, score higher than their male counterparts on a wide variety of measures, including producing high-quality work, goal setting, and mentoring employees. Using elaborate performance evaluations of executives, and some of these were these 360 evaluations, researchers found that women got higher ratings than men on almost every skill measured. Although the gender differences were small and sometimes men earned higher marks than women, the important sentence here is overall female executives were judged more effective than their male peers. Now, in one study, there were 425 high-level executives that were evaluated by 25 people. So this is really a 360 evaluation. And they were rated on 52 skills. Women execs won higher ratings on 42 of the 52 skills. Now, I don't want to make so much out of any one study, because any one study can succeed or fail for the wrong reasons. But just to give you an idea that women do reasonably well when they're being evaluated by people in a position to do the evaluation of them as individuals, not as stereotypes, which we know are negative. We see that women are scoring higher on this is some psychologist who led a major study. She concluded that women are scoring higher on almost everything we look at. And here's a table. I think you can see each X stands for a study. And here, I can read this because it's hard to see. None of these studies set out to find gender differences, but the authors stumbled upon these when they took a hard look at their data. So this is a skill, motivating others, and we see that women in 5 studies excelled over men. There was no case where men did better than women. Fostering communication, there were 3 studies where women were superior to men, 1 case where they were equal. Producing high quality work, 5 out of 5 studies show women to be better than men. Strategic planning, here we have 2 cases where men were scored higher, one was a tie, and one where women did better. Listening to others, women did better across the board. Analyzing issues, it was more of a split. So women are doing pretty well again because of how this study was done. Now, the question is, if women are so great, why aren't there more of them running major companies? That is the question, right? Let's take a look at some intriguing research results that may provide some answers to this critical question. I love this study. I love this woman she's an industrial psychologist, Madeline Heilman, and if you don't know her work, it's a treat, and it would be useful for you to read some of it. She has wonderful titles also. This one is No Credit Where Credit is Due, Attributional Rationalization of Women's Success in Male-Female Team. Forget the subtitle, it's too jargony. I can't stand jargon. The question she asked was, are there conditions at work under which women are given less credit for the success they achieve when they work jointly on tasks with male colleagues? This has to do with the question Betsy raised this morning about perceived competence. It's directly on point. This study is especially relevant today given the recent surge in the use of work teams in virtually every industry. Do you work in work teams, anybody here? They're very prevalent. And in the emphasis now being placed on the importance of teams for successful organizational functioning. So we have work teams being highly touted and proliferating. It's also important for understanding women's success in organizations because it's highly likely that when teams are formed, female employees are more likely to find themselves working with men than with other females. Why? Because there's so few females at higher levels in the organization. So we have to know about these male-female team groupings and what happens to females in those settings. So the question she posed, I mentioned before, wanted to look at how evaluators assign responsibility for work products that are produced by teams. So let's just take a little, move to the right for a minute. We're going to look at the stereotype here. We mentioned some of it before, but here it is again. Men are agentic. They possess traits such as ambition, confidence, self-sufficiency, dominance, and assertiveness. In contrast, women stereotypically are considered communal. They possess traits such as kindness, helpfulness, concern for others, warmth, and gentleness. So these are the stereotypes that we all have in our heads, and they're pervasive. They affect, and first of all, they're everywhere, and they affect evaluative behavior, especially when situations are ambiguous, as you'll see. So here is a dilemma that confronted the participants in Madeline Heilman's study. Imagine that they're confronted by an outstanding work product, clearly outstanding, that was completed by a team comprised of women and men. In her case, it was actually one man and one woman, but just imagine what happens. The quality of the work product is consistent with their expectations for the men in the team, but the quality of the product is not consistent with their expectations for women. Women aren't supposed to be hard-driving, pushing ahead, excelling. So they have a dilemma. So what are they to do? We all want to maintain our stereotypes. We have an investment in our own ideas. And in fact, in most cases, it's important to maintain your stereotypes. It gets you through the day. But in some cases, it's very detrimental. But one way to maintain your stereotype in this kind of situation is to call into question not the work product, because that was defined as exceptional, but rather women's contribution to the team effort. Were they actually responsible for the work product? So if the evaluators give more credit for the product's excellence to the men than the women, they can maintain their gender stereotype. Yes, the product was great, and the men did most of the work. But what happens? The women then, of course, get less credit for high-quality outcomes, and thus their work competence is belittled and their task effectiveness devalued as compared to the men with whom they are working. Now, this is one way in which women are going to have a heck of a hard time getting to the top if, when they're paired with a man, they're seen as being less responsible for the outcome of their work product. So she thought this was a very intriguing idea. She wanted to test this hypothesis. And they designed an experiment in which men and women worked together on a male sex type task. In one case, it was developing a certain kind of investment portfolio. So the team produced a joint product that was known to be very high quality. That was given. The evaluators had this information. And the evaluators rated the team members in terms of three variables: competence, degree of influence on the task, and leadership behavior. So the feedback then, so you had the evaluators, and the feedback was framed in one of two ways. It was either given as a feedback about the team's performance as a group, or it was framed in terms of each individual's contribution to the task. And the researchers reasoned that the evaluators, especially when evaluating women, would be affected by the kind of feedback about the dyad's task performance. Now, group level feedback, so this is, you get feedback about how well the group did, it creates ambiguity by definition. You don't know how each individual contributed, you just know how the group did. And when there's ambiguity, then that's the condition under which stereotypes tend to flourish. Because you fill in the blanks, whatever you think. And here are the data, really fascinating. When the evaluators were provided with individual feedback, as in this case, the men and women were rated essentially identically with respect to competence. However, when the evaluators got group feedback, the men were rated as significantly higher than the females on competence. The other thing to note here is that for the men, that's the light boxes, there was almost no difference. It's not statistically significant. Their ratings were not affected by whether the feedback was individual or group. But look at the women. When the evaluators got individual feedback about women, they rated them much higher than when the evaluators got group feedback about women. So that was really an important finding. That was about competence. Let's look at leadership, which is our topic today. We see a similar pattern. When the evaluators got individual feedback, this was not statistically significant difference in leadership. But when they had group feedback, look at the difference. So when the evaluators got feedback that said the group did wonderfully well, how much leadership do you think the women exhibited? They showed very little leadership, and the men were given much higher ratings. When women were thought to have taken the leadership role less than men in this condition, that's very important. So whenever it was possible for the evaluators to attribute responsibility to men, it was so attributed. Given an ambiguous situation, men got the credit, and women did not. And this is how this was summed up. Unless there was clarity about individual contribution to the successful group outcome, thereby precluding the attribution of responsibility. Let me just stop for a minute. When you give the evaluators specific information, Jane did this and John did that, that precludes the attribution of responsibility for success on the basis of gender stereotypes. You cut through the gender stereotype by giving specific feedback. When you don't do that, the stereotypes are going to take hold. Now, this is one way in which gender stereotypes can affect women's performance evaluations and ultimately their chances for advancement. Now, one thing that's really, really interesting, the evaluators in the study were both men and women, and they did not differ in their evaluations. All of us, male and female alike, share in the gender stereotypes in this society. We can't get away from them. And I think that's really important to know. It isn't that because you have a woman evaluator that somehow you don't have to push your case and make clear that she understands your contribution. No, wrong. She is just like anybody else in this culture. She's much more ready to assign competence and leadership ratings, high ones, to men than to women. Just because she's part of a culture, just like we all are. So what are the implications of this particular study? I'm sorry, it's such small print. Don't assume that every evaluation you receive is a direct reflection of your competence. If you get a lousy evaluation, you know you did good work. Something else is going on. Remember that gender stereotypes make it easy for managers to see women subordinates as stereotypical members of their sex and not as individuals. Be alert to the possibility that your managers may not have complete information about your contribution. Make sure they know. Blow your own horn. Be sure to make your contributions past and present known. In a subsequent study, this is a series of 3 experiments that were done. If evaluators knew the prior performance of the male and female team members, that undercut their stereotypic attributions. So let people know. Now, it's very hard for women brought up in our culture to kind of talk about your own accomplishments. It's sort of not the feminine thing to do. Forget it. Train yourself, get a friend and practice, but get up there and let your bosses know what you can do. Otherwise, if you leave it to them to figure it out, these days tell you what's going to happen. If you feel like that a male coworker is getting more than his fair share of the credit for joint work, speak up. Make sure people know. So my overall conclusions are that clearly women have what it takes to be effective leaders. The playing field for women in politics and business is not even. It's very uneven. Gender stereotypes expose women's successes to far more scrutiny than men's. And it's crucial to remember and to teach the next generation of men and women that women have held and currently hold the highest positions of power and leadership. Don't let anybody tell you that women can't do it because they've never done it, because a lot of women have, and it's important for us as women to know that and to make sure that everybody else knows it as well. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer your questions, or try to anyway, if there are any. In the back? The question was, how can we change the ways of journalists who write these kind of things? It's a very good question. Those headlines sell papers. They're jazzy. They get a lot of attention. My colleague, Carol Rivers, Carol does a lot of writing. She's an invited blogger on the Huffington Post. And she also, if you don't know about something called Women E-News, it's a daily. You should take a look at that. I mean, there are other examples, but it's hard. It's just hard. So I think becoming aware, writing letters to the editor, that you're aware of this kind of stuff going on, call up the writer, do something, make it known that you don't like it. You know, it's enough of this now. Let's talk about the real stuff. You know, what are Hillary's positions on things? I don't care about her V neckline, or yeah, that's not what I want to read in my paper. There were some other hands up. Yes.
I'm just wondering about studies. I was just thinking about this in the context of course evaluations and a differential student expectations of faculty and the role that course evaluations play. Is there some studies about that people play with that?
I don't know, but I'm sure there must be. It's a huge issue, but I don't feel competent to comment on it. I really haven't looked at that literature. But given all that we've talked about, I think it'd be interesting to look at that as well. There was another hand. Yes.
I was just going to make the point that I'm serving in search committees, and I think when you're reviewing the resumes and the letters of application, that's very often an ambiguous situation where because they all say very similar things and describe themselves in very similar ways, and people interpret what they say differently for men and for women. And if you can get women through the search process very into the interview things, you very often don't have to make an issue of female, that they speak for themselves and let them perform on their own because you're getting to the specifics. So I think it's a really good for us when we're in the universities doing searches to be sure that we don't let these prejudices come out in how people are judging written applications for jobs. And it's really pushing the woman into the group that's invited for an interview. They very often have a much more positive impression of them than the
Yeah, right, and I think what I love about this study, and I love her work in general, none of us are aware we're doing these things. We're just not. But now you are. So when you're sitting in a committee meeting and someone does something like that, you say, wait, just a minute, let's take a harder look. What are we doing here? Because we don't know. It's so ingrained. It's not like we should feel bad that we're doing this. We do it because we're part of this culture, and this is the way this culture is set up.
Yeah, you make a very good case for how the media presents women and what they focus on. But the fact is that I think there's also some truth to that. I know anecdotally, the daughter is 36. All of her friends are about her age. They were told they could be anything they want. They're all doctors and lawyers and work for big companies. And almost all of them have opted out, not totally, but in some sense, to work part-time, to not make partner. And these are choices that they made. And I have to respect that these are legitimate choices that are not produced by the media, but by their own real-life choices to be home more and not have the kind of careers that they would have if they didn't choose to have children.
Well, this is a huge topic, and one that I have very strong feelings about, and I know this literature very, very well. So I'll answer it briefly, and then if you want to talk privately, because it may not interest everybody to talk at the great length that this story deserves. A, there is no opt-out revolution. B, many women, I don't know your stories personally, obviously, women who leave the workforce do so not because of the pull of home, but rather because they have flexible work schedules and no one in their organization will allow them the kind of flexibility that everybody needs, particularly parents. And that story is just the way it is. 78% of professional women are working full time. Just on and on. I know all these data, and I know this. This is a real passion of mine because this story got picked up. That was, if you read that story carefully, the Lisa Belkin story, which I did, and I'm sure that anyone who did read it also would concur. The women that she profiled, these were Princeton grads who were married to men wealthy enough to have them stay home and be in book clubs all day long. It was anecdotal. And even the women that she highlighted in the story said to a person, this is a chapter in my life, it's not the whole thing, I tend to go back. I wanted to stay on my job as a TV anchor, but I couldn't possibly do the hours, they wouldn't give me a break, on and on and on. And she deferred, and this is a pattern in some of the Times magazine cover stories, big bold headlining, and they back away from it, at the end it comes out to be quite a different story. So that has come into our vernacular now, much to the detriment of women all across the board. Why would an employer, in his right mind, I said her or his right mind, make opportunities for women and break their back to give women a break when these women really want to opt out and go home? I think all women suffer. If you want to do your thing, then you do your thing. But it is not the way it is for most women. Most women do not have that choice. They're women working 2 and 3 jobs to support their families. And the tiny quarter or eighth or 10th of 1% of women who have enough money not to work should not be, even if they do opt out, the way we talk about women in work. And I really am very upset about the media coverage of this story, I have to tell you, because the data just show you that over and over again, not only are women more engaged in the workforce, increasing numbers, they're more likely to work full-time, full year than ever before. Their work pattern more and more similar to that of men constantly. I have a really hard time with that story. So I can tell you more and I can point you to some readings if you want, but I would not like to, everyone can make their own choices, but just to pick out anecdotes, you mentioned it was an anecdote, and then generalize, I think that does a huge disservice to most of us working women who have to do this, we want to do it, even if we don't have to do it, and sets everybody's back greatly. Yes, one more.
And the companies that are the women CEOs, do they find that those companies tend to steer women kind of out of those HR positions into those profit-making jobs? Do they do a better job?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that would be something interesting to look at. There are probably so few companies with women CEOs that you wouldn't have enough data points to do anything with that. Don't know the answer to that. One would imagine that if you get two lines of thought, and I know that this is true, and what the data are. It used to be thought that when women got to be a critical mass, everything would change because no one cared. When there are a few women, who gets into a flap about if women here, women there. But when women get to a critical mass, then they're going to break through and they're going to get to the top position. The other line of thought was quite the opposite. They said, okay, there aren't enough women, so who wants to bother? But when they got to be a critical mass, then the barriers would really go up. Because now they could potentially go through the barricades. So I don't know what the answer is. But women are, even though they're still a very tiny percent of the heads of major corporations. I showed you Patricia Russo. Now I think if young women knew Patricia Russo's story, for example, or Brenda Barnes' story, it would be so inspiring to say, hey, women can do this, and they are doing it. And look, but there isn't anything like that. You only get the story when they fail. That is the media story. They don't want power, or they get it and they fail. Someone ought to write a story about women, successful women. One of my interests now is women in science, and that's the same kind of deal also. You only hear about the women who don't make it to the top. But there are tons of women who make it to the top. You just don't hear about them. If the media doesn't, there are a lot of journalism students, I take it, in this room. There are a couple of really great articles to be written about this. Why aren't the women who make it in these fields highlighted, just glorified, and let it get out there and have an effect where it should have an effect? if you want the next generation to blaze a new path, make sure they know there's somebody out there who did it. It's not like it's completely uncharted territory. And there are these fantastic women doing all this stuff, and no one knows about it. How many of you knew about Patricia Russo? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, not very many people. And she's rated the most powerful woman in the world. What do you have to do to get a media story? I mean, really, what do you have to do? Isn't that worth a headline somewhere? The most powerful woman in the world has a family, and why isn't that a story? Yes? Can you speak up a little?
I have a research method question. On the study that was concerning men and women in management roles and how they scored on that, since as a society we make it more difficult for women to achieve higher leadership roles, wouldn't on average they be higher qualified than their male counterparts?
40% of managers are women in this country. But the word manager covers a lot of territory. I mean, you can be managing the corner grocery store or managing, a division of GM. So I don't think that the issue of, it's not clear to me that at every level of management, women have to outdo their male counterparts. Also, I think the question has to be framed a little differently. When someone has been, I'll give you one example from my interest in science. Women do much better in attaining leadership in organizations that are organized in a networked way, flatter organizations like biotech firms. They do less well in hierarchically organized institutions like elite universities and big pharmaceutical companies. Why? Because in organizations that are organized that way, very few people get to evaluate the woman candidate. The process is a more closed process. In a networked organization, each person is interacting with all kinds of other people, and they have a lot more input into the evaluation process. There's a lot less opportunity for gender stereotypes to operate. So to your point, when women are in an organization, and they are now being related to as, Jane Smith with her skill set, not as the woman, then stereotypes have very little impact on decisions, except in the case where it's ambiguous information, like I showed you before. So that, I think it's harder for women to get started. And it may be harder all the way along, but I don't really know. I don't know how to answer that question. I think that slide was a compilation of many studies. So while that may be true in some, it won't be true in all. There have been numbers of stories about women, again, when it's a 360 kind of evaluation, who do well. And I don't know how they control. They probably did. They would have to control for prior experience, or at least tenure in the job, something like that. But I don't know for a fact. Yes, in the back? Well, I don't have, I'm sure there's lots of different definitions. Leadership, one definition is someone's in a position to lead. And a person who leads has to have someone that they are leading. So in businesses, people who have subordinates, have decision-making responsibilities. In other areas, it's taking charge. I'm sure there are lots of definitions, but we don't know. In the military, I have a presentation on women in the military. We know what that means in the military. It's having command and control responsibility. So it varies from setting to setting, but it's someone who has power to make decisions and to affect the behavior of subordinates. You can't be a leader without a subordinate to start with. So there's some definitions that are couched that way. On the raid?
The $1 million question. So if women leaders in 360 evaluations are performing as well or better than their male counterparts, any thoughts around pay disparity?
Well, we do know, and of course, the data are group data. We do now know that the wage gap hasn't really closed much. But if you have to look at specific sectors, a colleague at work, Evelyn Murphy, who was the first woman to be elected lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, she has a book called Getting Even. I love that title. It's about getting pay equity. But she has all the numbers. She's an economist. But I think it's true, at least in some situations. So let me just without this being the definitive answer, there's a cohort factor here, so that younger men and women, the wage gap differential is smaller in younger cohorts than it is in older cohorts. That's one thing. The second thing has to do with the field that you're in. The third thing has to do with time. So let's just say you're a male and a female graduate of some law school, and you're let's see, never forget that. Let's say you're both a male and female law school students, and you're approaching graduation, and you have these summer jobs. So you go to some law firm, and given the way things are, the male student is more likely to be mentored by a male partner than the female student is. Male partners tend to have more power in the firm. So now they go for their job, and they go to apply, and let's say they go back to the same firm. They're not equal. He's had better internship experience. He's had more chance to network with senior management because he was mentored by someone male. So they're not quite even, but the pay differential is very small to start with. It starts to get wider as time goes by. Why? Because the little bump that he got in law school, then these bumps accumulate. So then the senior partner he's working for is in the management circle, the group head, the head group, and he tends to get more exposure, slightly better cases, and so forth. And then, of course, we get to the issue of women having children, and they get a big differential there. So I think that there is accumulation of small effects that gets women and men's salaries to disperse more over time. I don't think Patricia Russo is having a problem with her salary. I don't think Brenda Barnes is worrying about her salary. So at some level, when there's such a huge track record, that goes away. And when the people making the decision know your history, that goes away. But there's no doubt that there's a huge thing. Evelyn Murphy, after you read her wonderful book, you should know she started a foundation, and she now works full-time doing groups for girls, mostly through the WISE or other kind of groups. She calls them WAGE. I forget what it stands for. But it's getting girls thinking about salary, earnings early on, and negotiating, fighting for equal pay. Because if you don't do it, it's never going to happen. 50 years from now, we can talk about the wage gap, unless we get girls negotiating for salary, find out what men are worth and are getting, and fight for it. Yes?
Are there any other countries that's doing a better job at implementing the gender bias?
I don't know. I don't think it's pervasive. I think actually, in terms of percent of women in management, we do better than almost anyone. Again, that's management. It's a very broad, sort of label. I don't think they're doing so great. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I knew that literature once, but I haven't not kept up with it.
What responsibility do you think a woman like Rousseau in her position has for addressing parity
Well, I think she's, first of all, she's such an impressive woman that no one who knows her or her work could ever say, women can't do this job, or women can't do this kind of work. So I think that alone is one way she can influence the discussion, but people have to know about her. So I think most women do feel, I can't speak, feel some responsibility, because they didn't get to the top by waking up one morning and say, oh, see, I'm the president of, they had to do all this stuff, and they had to deal with the kind of discrimination and problems that most of us have to deal with. They may have been more successful at negotiating those hurdles, but they had to deal with them. So I imagine I don't know anything about what she does in that realm, but I would imagine that just by example, she would have a powerful influence, certainly within her own huge company and among her colleagues. Someone said years ago that the only way this is going to change is that when some male CEO's daughters want to follow their footsteps, and when they learn firsthand how hard their daughters have it, then they're going to realize what other women have gone through and make some changes. Certainly it's better than it was, there's no doubt. But we don't know about it. That's the thing that really is so frustrating. One more, yeah? Two more.
Hearing all the references to HR, it's frankly very disappointing that even as women, we're referring to HR as such a soft function. I'm in recruiting. I am bringing in the
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what was said. If you don't have profit and loss responsibility, your chance of getting promoted into top management is very, very low. That's just a fact.
You got to have a portion of HR in your career, but even in your leadership.
Yeah. Well,
And in HR, your talent management, you're helping people get to the next level. It may not be direct profit and loss, but you have an impact on that for the organization. So I think everyone's doing an injustice by looking down on that.
I don't think people, I'm just saying that what the literature says, that one of the things that women say about the obstacles to their own success is they haven't had sufficient profit and loss responsibility. Now, women, they have to know that. If they want to get to that corner office, they may not. Not everybody wants a corner office, male or female. But if they want that, then they have to make certain decisions about how to track their career. And that doesn't make it good or bad. I mean, there are tons of really great jobs where people have important impact, but if you want to get to a certain place, you have to know what jobs are going to get you there. That's just true in any field. If you want to be chief of cardiology, you have to have you have to make certain kind of choices. You have to decide to spend some time doing research. You have to go to conferences. You have to learn how to do fundraising. A lot of people say, hey, I'd rather just, work with my heart patients. Forget it. I don't want that. But that's fine. And that's not making it soft or anything else. This is a perfectly fine choice. But if you want to be chief of cardiology or you want to be whatever, CEO, then you have to make certain other kind of choices. That's really all I was saying.
I wanted to share an interesting observation in my field, and it's different maybe than in other science fields that are male-dominated. I'm in a female-dominated science field,
What field is that?
nutrition. And so what we see is we see men who have come into this field of nutrition of late are really promoted much more readily than their female counterparts. It's really an interesting phenomenon.
That phenomenon has been called the glass escalator. And it's been noticed years and years ago in nursing. There were very few men in nursing, and yet they tended to hold the supervisory positions. It was actually noticed before in education, in public education, secondary education. The superintendents of schools were by and large all male. Well, how come? They get a free, not free ride, but an easier ride up the escalator, where women don't. And if you want an explanation for that, there's so many out there. There's not one, but it's certainly noteworthy, and I'm glad you brought it up. And it must be very infuriating to women who've been struggling to find that some male comes along and they're bumped.
I think we're out of time.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Barnett will be available out at a table in the lobby, and you may purchase a book or speak with her further about these issues. There's also coffee and sweets out there, and you've got about 10 minutes until the afternoon sessions. Enjoy yourself.